Bitcoin mining is less about Bitcoin and more about energy these days. And that's what we've learned. When you're running the business, there are two main type of expenditure. There is CapEx and there is OpEx. Usually the CapEx is out of your control. When you start running the business, this is the OpEx that is the most important part. If you can manage your OpEx, that means that you can manage your profit.
Well, joining us today, we've got Medi Naseri. Medi is the co-founder of Lincoin Technologies, which, among other services, they created a Bitcoin mining pool, which we're a proud user of here at Abundant Minds. He has also pioneered a new load balancing and energy management service, which is called Load. This is a service that optimizes the energy use for flexible data centers, including Bitcoin miners, as well as other large energy users who are seeking to optimize how they use energy in their companies. So Mehdi's based in British Columbia. He and I have been friends now for a couple of years and super excited to have him here to discuss energy management and the future of abundant energy in the Pacific Northwest. Welcome to the pod, Mehdi.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks for having me on Abundant Minds podcast. Happy to be here and excited to be discussing what's going on in Pacific Northwest, in Western North America, and in general, Bitcoin mining and flexible data centers.
Love it. Well, could we start just a little bit with your background? I know you came to this world through an engineering lens. I would love if you talked a little bit about your background and maybe how you got interested in Bitcoin mining enough to build a couple companies in the space.
Well, yeah, I'm an electrical engineer. I've spent probably past 15, 16 years of my life working with wires, resistors, capacitors, electronics in general. Uh, and I've been in this space probably since 2019. But before actually like fully getting involved in Bitcoin mining during my like electrical engineering journey, I was mostly like in academia, like grad school, teaching, researching. Uh, During those times, I got involved in many different projects in energy management, power electronics, energy optimization for different types of systems. As part of it, like I probably did a lot of stuff in like large scale systems modeling and planning. That was a journey I had at school or let's say in academia. And in 2019 I said, "Hey, I'm done with this. I don't want to do anything related to what I've done. Like I hate electrical engineering. I'm so done with it." Said, "What is the next thing I like?" That's Bitcoin. Yeah. I was a Bitcoiner. Like I started like learning more about Bitcoin and like just buying Bitcoin in somewhere in like 2014. Vancouver, by the way, is the first city that had a Bitcoin ATM back then. So you could buy Bitcoin from an ATM here in Vancouver. So that's
That's
how
cool.
it started for me. Started like learning more about it, buying Bitcoin. That was like hundred something dollar at the time. I did not have much money though, so
Okay.
I couldn't buy like 1,000 Bitcoins. But 2019, I was done with school. What should I do? I said, let's do Bitcoin. What should I do? Let's do Bitcoin mining because like at the time I was just experimenting with some mining, mostly Ethereum mining, like with GPUs. But I wanted to build something for Bitcoin miners. The first thing that came to my mind was a Bitcoin mining pool. That was somewhere around like mid 2020, in the middle of COVID. Technically, um, working from home or not working from home. And my co-founder and I had a discussion. Let's do it. Let's build a platform for Bitcoin miners in North America. We started building a pool. Took us about a year to launch it. That was September 2021 that we launched it. Actually, I guess 10 days away from our birthday, third birthday actually. So we are turning three on September 7th. So we launched the pool, built the pool. So many users, mostly like small to medium scale miners, joined the platform in the first year. After about a year, we said, okay, what else could we do? Where else could we be adding value? And that was the moment that said, hey, we have background in electrical engineering. Why don't we apply it? And we were running away from it, as I told you. Said, Well, okay, let's combine the two. And the first thing that came to our mind was combining energy markets into Bitcoin mining. Like the conversation was already there. Like people were chatting about, hey, how do we trade energy in ERCOT? How do we trade energy in PJM? So we started building tools and software in order to bring that part of industry or integrating that into Bitcoin mining. So that was around 2020 that 2022 that we started building that product. And in late 2023, we actually finally launched our energy strategy platform, and we called it Load, which was a platform for flexible loads to manage their energy consumption. As the very first target, obviously, we started with Bitcoin mining because that was where we already had exposure, and that was probably the one of the industries that needed that very much. But expanding from there, we now have solutions for industrial loads, for data centers, and for compute industry, like mostly in general.
Very cool. Now, this might seem like kind of a 101 question considering how deep we go into energy and Bitcoin mining, but why is energy management so important for Bitcoin miners specifically?
So in any business, when you're running the business, there are two main type of expenditure. There is capex and there is opex. Usually the capex is out of your control, so you have to make an investment, buy the equipment, buy ASICs, buy furniture, whatever for your business. And then when you start running the business, this is the OPEX that is the most important part.
Hmm.
If you can manage your OPEX, that means that you can manage your profit.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, in Bitcoin mining, the biggest operational expenditure or OPEX is energy. And that's the case for many other businesses. Let's say in food industry, the OPEX is from like the materials, the food that they're buying. But in Bitcoin mining, the energy is the main operational expenditure. And the next one would be like staff and other things would follow. But if you can manage the main cost, the biggest cost, you can manage the profit margin. And here's the thing, that's our background. We started as a mining pool, we built an operational ASIC management software, and we ended up in energy. When you are running a mining pool cannot make a mining operation more profitable. You can't. There is no definition of a good pool. A pool is a pool. You get paid. You can let's say this. You can never get paid more than FPPS. You might do PPLNS, you might do PPS plus, you might do FPPS. At the end of the day, math says that you can never make more than FPPS. Never. So the mining pools are competing for like 0.5% less fee. Just join my pool. You can never add more value. After that, companies started to work on firmware. Said, hey, let's build a firmware that adds value. And the best firmware out there could probably increase your profitability by, I don't know, 3, 4, 5%. And they charge you an extra 2.5%. So technically, you're not gaining much value. But the area that actually brings the actual value or can increase your profit margin significantly is where you can manage the biggest OPEX. If you can manage energy, if you can harness the energy consumption, you can manage the profit margin significantly. We published a report on ERCOT grid for the month of July. That was published, I guess, around 10 days ago. And based on that report, the right energy strategy could increase your profit margin by 70%.
Wow.
7-0. And the right energy strategy is more important than what firmware you use, what mining pool do you use. You have to pick the right energy strategy.
Hmm. So when we're thinking about optimizing our profit margins as miners through our energy strategy, what's the main tool that we have at our disposal? Like you just talked about firmware, which is essentially just code that runs your machine a little bit differently, maybe optimizes a few parameters. But when we're talking about energy management, what are we actually doing? How are we optimizing our energy procurement?
So probably that's a decision that takes shape over time. I mean, from the moment that you decide, hey, I should build a mine, the location that you choose plays a big role.
Hmm.
That is in that location, what type of exposure to the grid can you get? Is it part of a co-op, a utility? Do you have direct exposure to the wholesale market? How things work, how the tariffs and like pricing works for you? That's the moment that you start developing your energy strategy. After that, obviously there are so many different ways that you can negotiate with your power provider. I'm sure you've been through that personally. uh, how can I optimize this rate? I know I'm not gonna pay you $20 per, I don't know, 20, like let's say $100 per megawatt hour. Give me options, give me opportunities that so I can decrease my cost. Is there a demand response program? Is there a way that I can invest in my substation? What are the different ways that I can decrease uh, the overall cost of my power? That could be energy cost, transmission distribution cost, delivery cost, demand charge, whatever.
So when we talk about demand response, if you haven't been in the mining industry, is something that most people have never heard of. It's not a new thing. It's been around since decades before Bitcoin mining existed. But maybe talk about why demand response is something that's so important for Bitcoin miners and what it is and why we participate in it.
Probably nobody talked about demand response even in Bitcoin mining before 2020. That was something that we as Bitcoiners and Bitcoin miners learned maybe like 3 4 years ago. The reason for that was that we noticed that hey, the operation that we run is not really a need for anyone. Like no one is relying on my Bitcoin mining operation. I can curtail, I can stop mining whenever I wish, and nobody cares. Bitcoin doesn't care, Bitcoin network doesn't care, the electricity company probably cares, but like doesn't care. So you have that non-graceful curtailability option that makes Bitcoin miners probably the best energy consumer out there in terms of demand response. So you can technically shut down a mine in under a few seconds, and you can ramp it back up in a matter of a few minutes. So that's the perfect type of energy consumer for the grid.
And demand response for people that haven't heard of it before is essentially just turning off at key times when demand is high on the grid or when there's more expenses to procuring energy. So we're essentially just timing our load or timing our usage to fit in this economic profile or this reliability profile. And Bitcoin miners, like you said, are uniquely suited to do it because we're not an essential resource. We can turn off at any time, and it doesn't necessarily hurt the network. It doesn't hurt our productivity. And in fact, if we're incentivized properly to do it, it's very much to our benefit to participate in these programs and curtail these hours to, like you said, increase our profit margins depending on where you are by tens of percentage points or even up to 70%. Um, what do you think demand response programs give back to the grid? So why do these programs exist in the first place? I mean, why would people pay you more money to turn off than to just use the energy in the first place?
So I think there are so many issues that grid operators has been dealing with in the past few decades. Clearly, the first role of a grid operator is balancing the supply and demand.
Hmm.
That might be easy if you're running that at small scale, but as the scale gets bigger, that's going to be very, very complicated task. Uh, there are so many different matters that you have to be taking care of. For example, first of all, there's the balancing supply and demand. Next, there is balancing the frequency of the grid, which technically depends on supply and demand. The next one is balancing the voltage in a specific area to make sure that the like entire grid is running at a stable voltage. And then there are other matters. For example, the grid is a very slow system, or not the grid. The grid is actually very fast, but the participants in the grid are very slow. Let's say some of these generators they cannot ramp up and ramp down very quickly. Some of the load or generating resources, such as wind and solar, those are very unpredictable. So, as the grid operator, you have to be ready to respond to unpredictable changes, mostly caused by renewables, such as wind and solar, and so many other things, such as, like, I don't know, outages, reliability situations, wildfires, so many other things. You have to deal with them, and in order to do that, like, grid operators has been sourcing the demand response, or in general ancillary services, from different players in the market. Regularly, they have been mostly relying on generators to do that. Recently, the batteries are playing a big role,
Hmm.
but those are not enough. So they are looking for more resources to help them bring more reliability to the grid. And Bitcoin miners, as the most flexible type of load, could be definitely a big part of that process.
So, is it directionally true to say that even though we might be getting paid more to turn off than we pay in electricity costs, that we're actually saving on energy costs for other consumers on the grid?
Yes. So technically, that reliability expenditure is set by the grid no matter what. And they are offering that to someone who is, let me put that this way. The reliability products are usually sourced in an auction type of process. So they they give that opportunity to someone who bids less for that opportunity. Technically, if a Bitcoin miner is accepted into a reliability program for demand response or ancillary service, that means that they are more affordable than alternatives.
Hmm.
Yes, they are getting paid, but they're not like spending that from a new like type of resource. They're actually spending that from an existing resource, which is called like resource plan, or let's say ancillary service plan. And if Bitcoin miners are not receiving that, someone else is receiving that same money.
Hmm. So in the past, or depending on where you are in the grid, if you're not paying a Bitcoin miner to shut off, you might be paying either a coal plant or some other kind of fossil fuel peaker plant
Mhm.
that's not running for most of the year. And for those 10, 50, 100 hours, whatever it may be, instead of paying $1,000 a megawatt hour or $500 a megawatt hour to shut a Bitcoin miner off, you might be
Mhm.
paying something like, in our case, I've seen in the Northwest Power Council, $5,000 to $14,000 a megawatt hour to turn on or import this extra generation. So that's the mechanism that we're saving money for the grid, correct?
Yes, yes, correct. And here's the thing: like most grids, they have two two elements in their pricing. There is an energy like element, and there is a capacity element. So, and that's not the case in ERCOT, by the way. Like mostly, the Western grids and like PJM, they have the capacity element. So technically, the grid operator has to source capacity from different generators or resources and pay them beforehand for their availability to help them balance the grid. And at the same time, they are capping the prices at like $2,000 per megawatt hour, but they are paying extra reliability or capacity payments to those resources in order to help them balance the grid over time. But in the case of ERCOT, there is no capacity. The limit though is higher. It's like $5,000. So any any like energy generator could participate in that process of balancing the grid and be incentivized by the energy price rather than the capacity price. But let's say in PJM or West Coast grids like California, Oregon, like the entire like Western interconnect, there is mostly a capacity market and an energy market.
Hmm. So we talked about ERCOT and the Texas grid because that's a really interesting example of these programs in action, and they've been in many ways kind of leaders and maybe experimenters is even a better word in some of these programs before everybody else. what makes our region of the country different in the Pacific Northwest? We're both based in the western part of North America, and this is a
Yes.
really interesting region for its own reasons.
Yeah. Well, if we want to talk about that region, we probably have to zoom out a bit.
Hmm.
We call it Western Interconnect. That's a very big area that starts from BC in Canada, goes all the way down to Mexico. And that the scale of that like Western Interconnect is around like 300 gigawatt. That's a very big interconnection. And there are so many small players in this, um, let's say, market, or let's say not a market, but like this is technically an islanded grid. For example, California ISO is one of them, BPA is one of them, BC Hydro is one of them, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, like each of them is part of this larger grid. Uh, they are interconnected, so technically they can have some independent strategies, uh, but they are somehow rely on each other. If we zoom in on Pacific Northwest, we probably are talking about like BC, Washington, Oregon. These three states are actually very famous for hydropower.
Hmm.
So the majority of energy comes from renewable hydro, like hydro dams, and other sources such as natural gas, coal, wind, solar. Those are relatively small compared to hydro. So that's probably the biggest identifier of Pacific Northwest, clean hydropower.
And you mentioned that we're part of, or that there are several different entities that make up the Western Interconnect, and historically, at least, it seems like they've been kind of fragmented, where there's not a whole lot of overlap. There's not necessarily cohesive programs that run between them, and
Mhm.
even just recently, the Western Energy Imbalance Market has started to come online and be considered this kind of balancing resource where these different ISOs, these different grid operators
Mhm.
can work together and even though we're in Oregon, we might sell some of our capacity back to the California ISO or vice versa. What do you think the impact or the implication of that kind of new unification of our region is going to be, or is there any impact?
I think there is. Technically, the only actual independent ISO in the region is California. But the good thing is that they start this Western energy imbalance market to kind of get everybody else participate in that process. So their grid becomes more reliable through collaboration with other regions. Uh, I think that's a good starting point. The problem is that uh, even California is not as transparent and competitive as other electricity markets. So technically, other players such as BPA, BC Hydro, these are like government companies. These are like federal companies or crown company, as we call it in Canada. By nature, they are slow and they're not innovative. For instance, is one BC and one other region. Like there are only two regions out of 17 regions in North America where consumers do not have access to real-time energy pricing, or nobody has access to it. So I'm just saying like these are so retarded, like so retarded. Uh, Other regions are slightly better, but in general, as long as the grid is running by a government entity, you can't expect much innovation. California ISO is leading the way by initiating that Western energy imbalance market. So all these like small utilities and companies are trading energy there. Hopefully that is the starting point for larger industrial loads to also be able participate in that market, not only for energy but also for data trading, for ancillary trading. So in general, this specific area, I see a big opportunity for advancement through that initiative, which is Western Energy Imbalance Market.
I've thought that it's really interesting, especially living here and knowing that there's so much abundant hydro and that we have such a great climate as well. that there aren't more miners, especially that choose to kind of have their base of operations here. I mean, we've talked about a few facilities that we know exist, but really compared to other regions of the country, especially Texas and kind of that corridor going up the Midwest, there's so much more capacity there than in our region. Do you think that the reason we don't have as much mining capacity is because those programs haven't been available and they're kind of just now coming out? Or do you think that it's more nuanced than that?
I think that's definitely one part of it. So technically, if there is a market where Bitcoin miners are exposed to that wholesale market, that's definitely more attractive to them. Especially like right now, you see the hash price is super low, so you have to be very competitive on energy prices in order to remain profitable, and that might be difficult to accomplish in a like classic electricity like market, not necessarily market, like classic electricity tariff. So you have to have the option to choose which electron you want to grab from the grid and which one you don't want. In that case, you'll be able to manage your expenditure and remain profitable. So this region has built the infrastructure, and we are moving in that direction, but it's not quite there. So that might be one of the reasons that we don't have more miners in this 300 gigawatt grid that we are at. But there are also other things. For example, the transmission distribution cost is actually very high in the Pacific region compared to other areas, like maybe double, triple cost of transmission distribution for consumers here in the Western US and Western Canada. Um, and some of the reasons for that are mainly lack of development in transmission lines, and there is also a new risk that is increasing the prices, and that's the risk of wildfires. And as you know, it is happening a lot more often recently, and we're dealing with it. And actually, the grid operators are actually dealing with it more than anybody else because they have all these transmission lines passing through all the forested areas, so they are exposed to that risk, and they have to potentially ensure that transmission line or replace the damaged ones, so the cost of transmission distribution goes slightly higher here.
Very interesting. So if I'm hearing you right, I mean, there's a couple of reasons why it hasn't been more popular here, but
Mhm.
also that in the future we can be a really significant resource to making sure that we do have the most reliable grid in the Pacific Northwest, and that we can be, one of the more important energy balancing resources. How big of a slice, or how important do you think things like Bitcoin mining are going to be to the reliability and economics of the grid looking into the future?
Actually, a lot, mainly because this region, like Pacific Northwest, has been mainly relying on hydro power, but most resources are exhausted in terms of hydropower. Like we already have all the dams that we could have. You can't probably build a lot more dams. You have already like exhausted all the resource. If you want to replace coal plants or build more capacity, that and you should build that more capacity, uh, wind is probably the next option, and nuclear is the next option. Nuclear is probably not very attractive to politicians because of the risks. Maybe SMRs in the future, but probably wind and solar are the next resource that they're going to tap into. The problem with wind and solar is the unpredictability, and with that, they have to build a lot of battery storage, and they are going to need a lot of flexible resources, just similar to Bitcoin miners, to be able to reliably operate the grid. So I think this area of the continent would require more Bitcoin miners and more balancing resources.
And it's true that, especially in our region, there's mandates that you have to build new energy in a renewable way. It's got to be either wind or solar or some other approved way of generating. So if you're a grid operator and you're trying to ensure reliability and resource adequacy far into the future, you're pretty much backed into a corner where you just have to overbuild these resources, planning for, days where it's not going to be nearly as abundant as you hope it is. And in the absence of we as Bitcoin miners providing demand response, that just ends up creating a lot of waste, right?
Yep. And here's the thing: when you're dealing with hydro, in most cases there is no waste, right? You just stop the flow of water, and you are storing energy. But in the case of renewables, you can't stop wind. You can't stop sunlight. You have to generate that energy. You have to ROI on your investment on those infrastructure, and you have to sell it to someone. As a matter of fact, this area, like California specifically, is dealing with those negative prices during the day, the dog curve, uh, and that's affecting the Bitcoin mine. That's affecting the solar generators significantly. So technically, more consumers, more flexible consumers who can consume energy or store energy as batteries during the day would be very, very essential moving forward.
And if that energy isn't sold and you've got negative pricing on the grid, I
Mhm.
mean, I know at least in the US there's tons of subsidies for these projects. So essentially, if we don't buy it, who pays for it? The taxpayer?
Technically, yes, because they will have to curtail that energy resource. So technically, you can't inject more than like demand to the grid. You'll have to like just curtail the solar or wind and just stop generating energy. Technically, the ROI like period gets longer, and technically people are paying for that ROI, extended ROI time.
That's
They,
unbelievable.
yeah, there and as you said, there are so many subsidies. Like unbelievable that U.S. government is paying over $20 per megawatt hour to wind farms under generation. Technically, they can offer their energy at negative 24 and still be profitable. But that's not the case. Sometimes they get curtailed. Say, hey, we're not buying energy from you. Zero, none. Technically, they also can't get paid and they cannot ROI and they're like wasting a lot of investment in that case.
So if I were listening to this from the outside and I hadn't been exposed to this for the last few years, my question going through my head would be how can someone who only uses energy lower the cost of energy for me as a consumer? That doesn't make any sense. If you're not bringing new energy to market, how are you having a positive impact on prices for me as a consumer?
Uh, I think there are two main ways that an energy consumer could participate in that process. As a Bitcoin miner, like this is probably the first thing that they say: supply demand. More demand, less supply. The price goes up, and you guys are increasing our prices. They might be right in terms of lower cap of the price. Like yes, we are consuming power when energy is cheap, so the cheap energy gets more expensive. But we don't consume energy when it is expensive, so it becomes cheaper. At the same time, because a flexible load or flexible demand is consuming power, that means that this market is better or more lucrative for generators to invest in that area. So more generation will be built in that specific area. And eventually, the grid will become more reliable, the supply goes up, and more reliability means potentially lower prices for the end consumer. But yeah, that's a very potentially complicated economics, but eventually the end users will benefit from flexible loads.
So if I told you or told someone on the street that our company mission as a data center operator and constructor and Bitcoin miner was to lower the cost of energy for all consumers in the Pacific Northwest by building the largest grid balancing resource in the region so that we could participate in demand response and lower the cost of energy for all other participants on the grid. Are we crazy? Is this a realistic vision or is
I
this
think
something that is inevitable whether it's us or somebody else?
Yeah, they probably tell you, aren't you the guys who are boiling the oceans? Are you guys who are destroying environment? How could you do that, right? So in general, there is that mindset against Bitcoin miners and against flexible loads. I see that same mindset is being developed against AI and computing in general. Uh, and they might be right if we are a rigid load. If we are just consuming power no matter what, we don't care about anybody else, and our economics are actually promoting that. But in reality, that's not true. So we only consume power when it is cheap. We only consume power when nobody else wants it. In reality, data centers are actually very different. They consume power no matter what. They promote 100% uptime. And I think we should see a lot of change in data center industry to become as flexible and leave a positive impact similar to Bitcoin miners to communities and to the grid.
So you mentioned AI and other traditional data center users, and I think for most people, they get conflated together. Like they're seen as basically the same thing. And you just mentioned that really they aren't. They have a very different load profile. They have a very different economic incentive profile. So they're really behaving very differently on the grid. How do you think that we as Bitcoin miners interface with traditional data centers or with AI compute in the future? Are we all, going after the same resources? Is it a one or the other kind of thing, or do you see us kind of merging as co-located energy resources together?
So as Bitcoin miners, we have learned quite a lot in the past 4 or 5 years. What we have learned is how to support the grid. And I believe that technology or that experience that we have developed over the past 4 years is going to be change maker for data centers in general. Either we can teach them how to do it, or we can merge with them, or we can build those data centers and implement the same strategies on the data centers that we develop. There's an idea out there that hey, there is a chance of co-location between Bitcoin miners and classic data centers. I think that is a huge opportunity actually. Uh, that's not enough though. So the energy usage management is definitely important. At the same time, the workload management is also super important in that case. Uh, AI computation, or in general, like classic computation, is not as curtailable as Bitcoin mining. You require graceful curtailment in those cases, and you have to have solutions how to seamlessly curtail compute to minimize the effect on the end consumer who is chatting with their chat GPT. All of a sudden their chat should not stop. They have to have a way to seamlessly keep using that platform, but the source of energy or source of compute changes. So those are the areas that I think should be further developed at the intersection of classic data centers and Bitcoin miners. And these two could collaborate a lot in order to make that happen.
You talked with me a couple weeks ago, and you said something that I really liked, which was we've got to be leaders in developing energy campuses. So we're very smart users of energy and balancers of energy, but ultimately integrating some kind of generation is an important part of our strategy and an important part of giving back as we grow and mature as an industry. Could you talk a little bit about what an energy campus is to you?
So, as Bitcoin miners, 5 years ago, we only cared about Bitcoin. It was like 90% Bitcoin, 10% infrastructure and energy. I would say right now, more than 50% is about energy and infrastructure. So, Bitcoin mining is less about Bitcoin and more about energy these days. And that's what we've learned. We are good at energy, we are good at infrastructure. We can build that infrastructure, and we are using that for Bitcoin mining because Bitcoin network is kind of a very good buyer. They they buy your energy 24/7. But if there is another customer for you who can consume that same energy at a higher price, why not? You're gonna sell that to them. So I see Bitcoin miners have a very good opportunity in order to be converted into energy campuses to consume energy and convert or sell that to the Bitcoin network and sell it to anybody else who is paying more. That could be data centers, that could be hydrogen plants, that could be data. We said data centers, right? Like energy storage. So many other flexible energy consumers out there that could potentially be a good buyer for our energy.
One of the interesting conversations I had last week with a friend was, one of the issues that we see with kind of ushering in a nuclear renaissance is nobody wants to have these things near their towns. They don't want them close by in case of an unlikely accident, even if there's a low chance of it. And we talked about how, it's really tough to co-locate a traditional data center with a small modular reactor that's out in the middle of nowhere, but that a Bitcoin mining facility can run an entire facility off of a single Starlink connection. So in a sense, it's sort of like we're a pioneer species able to go in and colonize these areas where otherwise it wouldn't make any sense to build anything else. We can develop these energy resources and a consumer on site that makes it make sense for the time being. And, like the pace of progress in the rest of civilization and how fiber and connectivity has moved up and down the coasts and all throughout the middle of the continent, if we just are the first to go out to these kind of middle of nowhere places and develop something, at some point that there will be a possibility of running fiber and running a traditional data center and getting that local resource connected to a wider metro. So, do you think that's harebrained? Is that crazy, or is that where we're going? Is that we're paving the way for energy and connectivity to go out further to the edge than it has before?
Yeah, we Bitcoin miners are probably a very reliable buyer of energy, but they are different with other energy buyers. They don't care if you curtail them. Uh, so if you are selling that energy to anybody else, they will complain that, hey, what's going on? You committed 95%, 99% uptime, and it's not there. But Bitcoin miners say, hey, I don't care. Just shut me down anytime. Just provide power to me as cheap as possible so I can make more profit on the other end. So I think that feature in Bitcoin miners makes them early adopter of all those technologies and helps them deploy their resources in very very remote areas. Uh, Clearly, if there is a new energy resource such as SMR, such as let's say I don't know, isolated energy resources, I think Bitcoin miners would be the buyer of that energy.
If you could paint a picture of what sort of an ideal future looks like, and how the Bitcoin network could advance our energy future to have the most positive impact on humanity, because I see the Bitcoin network as kind of a common good, and same with Bitcoin mining. It has a huge potential to create a lot of good in the world. What, how would you describe the ideal way of this working out for us and working out for the other consumers who have nothing to do with our industry but are going to feel the impacts of what we create in the world?
The flexibility that Bitcoin mining has is actually a very big feature of it, and that makes us a solution to many problems. The good thing is that the Bitcoin network is also very resilient. So technically, if there is a too many new resources coming in or a lot of resources leaving the network, the network will rebalance itself through difficulty adjustment. So the combination of the two words, like the Bitcoin and energy, I guess it will make Bitcoin miners very, very resilient partners to partner in new projects and partner for new developments in energy industry.
Hmm. You guys don't just work with Bitcoin miners, right? I mean, with Load, you're actually pioneering IoT devices, other types of
Mhm.
compute. If you're not directly Bitcoin mining, how else can you work with Load, for example?
So Bitcoin mining is a launchpad. That's what I say all the time. Probably even like the most advanced IoT engineers never thought that we are going to be managing 50,000 IoT devices in a single facility. Like, nobody thought that this could be possible. So we are managing probably the most advanced IoT systems in the world by managing tens of thousands of IoT devices on a single network. So we learned a lot through that process, and given that, we now can operate any type of IoT system in a fail-safe, reliable manner. Uh, so as a matter of fact, so Bitcoin mining is obviously the biggest market for us, but we are entering those new markets with the learnings and experience that we gained in Bitcoin mining.
What would be a common example of an IoT device that someone might have access to that they don't even realize they have access to?
Well, IoT device. IoT means Internet of Things, right?
Hmm.
So we are talking about any device that is not a computer, but it is connected to internet. ASICs technically are computers, but we count them as IoT devices. There are so many smart, let's say, plugs, or there are sensors, or there are thermostats that are technically IoT devices. They are being used across industrial settings or residential settings, such as like HVAC system in large scale buildings, industrial plants such as like oil refinery, cement industry, hydrogen industry. So these are all relying on IoT systems to manage their operations.
What do you think is the most important impact that you guys can have at load in terms of helping us manage energy in the world?
I think reliability is the most important. Uh, we are we are running emission critical operation as Bitcoin miners. Actually, we think that nobody cares if we are mining Bitcoin or not. Like they see us as a resource, as a random dude mining Bitcoin. But in reality, as we scale up, we become an important part of the grid. And if there is a failure in our operation, that could impact millions of people who are connected to the same grid. So I think moving forward, reliability is a very important aspect of Bitcoin mining operations, and we have to care a lot about that. That's where a lot of investment is going from our team to actually make our systems more reliable and more fail safe.
Now, I think we've touched a lot on the energy side, which I think we both agree is maybe the most important impact that we can have in broader society working in this industry is making sure that we're optimizing the way that the world uses energy. But from the Bitcoin mining pool side, what can people take away that are the consequences of say working with a bad pool, and why is it important to make sure that you work with a mining pool that's honest, that's transparent? What are some of the things that can go wrong if you aren't trusting of the person who's directing your hash and paying you out from the Bitcoin network?
I think we have to define a good pool first. Who is a
Hmm.
good pool? I think in this case, it is very different than any other industry. Let's say when you say, I'm looking for a good lawyer or a good doctor, you're looking for someone who you can trust. In the case of Bitcoin mining pool, you should find a mining pool that you should not trust. You don't have to trust that pool, because if you are trusting someone, that means that they can actually take advantage of your trust. And that is the main reason I'm a bit advocate for FPPS, or at least the way that we implement FPPS, because people can audit what they make without trusting us as a mining pool. Although FPPS has its own problems, clearly there is no perfect solution. So that's what I would say about a mining pool. A good mining pool is a mining pool yet you don't have to trust.
Do you think, and this is a common question that we get, do you think that mining pool centralization is a real issue?
It is not an issue right now, but it could become an issue. The thing is that we have centralization in every industry.
Hmm.
And we have it in Bitcoin mining pools for sure. Say more than 50 or 60% of the hash rate is being managed by two mining pools, or maybe more, if you consider all the like a smaller pools being part of those big pools. Uh, Eventually, that could become an issue, but in reality, I don't see that as a problem. Uh, Sooner or later, mining pools will have to comply with so many regulations. Uh, no matter how big or small they are, they have to follow the same rules directed by the government. Sorry, I don't want to say that, but that's the reality and that's the truth and that's going to happen. I think the privacy and decentralization should probably happen on the users layer rather than the mining pool layer. Eventually, we gotta comply with what government asks mining pools to do. So if we are looking for decentralization, we should seek it on the user layer, on the application layer.
We've seen some of the mining pools have been filtering transactions lately. We've also seen uh, the rise of some kind of different models of pools like Ocean coming out. Um, how do you think that these different kinds of models of operating a pool affect Bitcoin censorship resistance in general?
Uh, it's not going to stop Bitcoin network of being censored. We have different types of censorship. Uh, One way is to, let's say, censor the type of transactions that you don't like, such as ordinals or all these other type of new transaction, non-standard transactions. Let's not call them non-standard, by the way, but non-classic Bitcoin transactions.
Non-financial transactions.
Yes, non-financial transactions. The other type is actually enforcement by governments, uh, and both of these will happen. We probably can't stop them uh, with the current like requirements of the Bitcoin network. If we change the code potentially, but not with the existing code that is running Bitcoin.
Even if we have, let's call it 60 or 70% of pools that are complying to these regulatory requests, there can still be a minority of hash rate that pushes transactions through that don't get censored, right? I mean, even if it's a very small pool and it maybe only pushes a block through once a day or even less frequently, there will always be a way to get through a transaction that doesn't fit a certain censorship regime, right?
Well, potentially those compliant mining pools can reject that block and only build on top of compliant blocks. Again, I hate saying this. I'm not supporting that, but that could happen as long as the mining pools have the control of doing that. They will use that control to execute that strategy.
Hmm.
And as a matter of fact, they might not like it, but the enforcement from government will require them to do so, and they sooner or later they will start doing that. That's why I'm saying the decentralization should happen on the application layer if we want to keep the same Bitcoin network that we have today.
So our vectors for keeping this censorship resistant are either build on top of it and don't depend on mining pools to mine your blocks, do it on a layer two or a layer three, or what? Change the code in some way that everybody agrees with.
I think Bitcoin community should learn how to modify the code. I mean, we have done it multiple times
Hmm.
through BIPs. Uh, so a potential upgrade in the code that brings more privacy could be important. But at the same time, it is important that we start practicing it and learning it because guess what? Quantum computers are coming, and there is a chance that SHA-256 is not a good encryption way anymore. So if we want to guarantee longevity of Bitcoin network, we have to be ready to accept change. and improve the code.
So either way, we have to be adaptable to change. And I've heard this quantum computing fear, and in some sense it's maybe not overblown, but I think misunderstood by a lot of people. And as I understand it, the real risk immediately with quantum computing is just lost coins. There's just coins sitting in addresses that haven't moved in a while. So as long as you're not staying in the same place for far too long, shouldn't be too much of an attack surface, because you these algorithms are going to naturally have the incentive to go after coins that aren't likely to be moved, go after these wallets that haven't moved their coins in years, or maybe have been lost forever. Is that an accurate assessment to you? Or do you think it's more dangerous than that?
As long as there is a new computing system that could break SHA-256, I think there is no safety. And Bitcoin network could be their secondary target. I mean, they can break into any encrypted system. They can break into any bank account. They can break into any encrypted chat. The thing is that those other systems, such as like banking systems, chats, those are built by developers and they can switch to a quantum safe encryption method. The question is, are Bitcoiners and Bitcoin community ready to adapt to that change? Are they ready to switch to another encryption method other than SHA-256? And we should start discussing that. We should kind of prepare everybody in this community that, hey, there might be a time that we have to upgrade. And that's only one aspect. As we discussed, like privacy could be another aspect of
Mm.
like upgrading in the Bitcoin network.
Well, it's super important that we think about it beforehand, because we're a community, and Bitcoin is a network that touts itself as being highly anti-fragile. So it is presented to the world as being something that faces attacks and faces threats, and these kinds of things that can damage it, and then comes back stronger because of it, which is the hallmark of any good anti-fragile system. So I'm with you. I mean, it's better to face it and understand what it is at this point, rather than bury our heads in the sand and wake up 10 years from now and wish that we had done something earlier.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
Well, Mehdi, I've kept you now for almost an hour. I would love if you'd share any final thoughts, whether on energy management, pools, anything that you want to leave the audience with that you think is important for them to know.
Thanks, Bo. I think that was a great conversation. And that was unique because we discussed Pacific Northwest, which is not necessarily the most popular topic in Bitcoin mining. But I think that was necessary to have this conversation. And I think there is a great future ahead of flexible loads and Bitcoin miners in Pacific Northwest. I know you guys are doing a great job where you are, and I'm sure you guys will be very successful. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate that, Mehdi. For anybody listening, if you're already running a mining facility, you're welcome to reach out, get connected to us. We're happy to connect you with Mehdi. You might have an opportunity already to lower your all in cost of power, increase your margins just by participating in demand response if you're not already. So, regardless of whether you're in the Northwest or you're in another part of the North American continent, we can definitely help you contribute to the mission of lowering the cost of energy for all the other consumers on our grid if you choose to participate. And it is absolutely a win win. So feel free to reach out to us. We'll happily connect you to Medi. And Medi, where can people find you, connect with you, keep up with what you're doing, whether they want to interact with Lincoin or Load? How can they keep up with you and get help by you and your team?
I think Twitter and LinkedIn are the best way to connect. Just you can follow me on Twitter and just DM me on Twitter. My handle is Medi underline Naseri, and I should be respond to you very quickly.
So I wish you had said something else about us being able to run a censorship resistant network. So the only way that we could do this is actually getting a Bitcoin improvement proposal run through. So a developer has to come through and actually write some code, and then give us a reason to adopt it as a majority of nodes. Am I right in that?
Well, you are right, but with the existing code, there is no way around it. We have to comply, or let's say Bitcoin mining pools will have to comply. There is no way around it. And the problem is in the block creation methodology. In the existing method, uh, the mining pools get to choose transactions. And if they get to choose, that means that they get to reject. And if they have the capability of rejecting a transaction, that means that they can comply. And if they can comply, they have to comply. So the current code is not censorship resistant, and it can't be. So as you said, we have to get devs involved and come up with some sort of block creation alternative which is more censorship resistant.
So if you're on the camp of ossification where you don't want the code to change ever again, you're by default saying I want to be censored by a government on the base chain, and my only option for potentially escaping that is using a layer two like a Fedi or a Lightning.
I think they will keep following you wherever you go, and they are already building tools for that, for Lightning, to kind of stopping nodes from passing transactions who are that are not compliant. Again, like there is a lot of discussion around it. Like there is some people who like it, some people who doesn't like it. Compliance is not necessarily bad. There are good purposes for compliance, like stopping crime, one of them,
Sure.
or the crime that everybody think that is crime, not necessarily the government. Uh, but at the
We
same time, that is restricting the privacy of people.
Right, and the issue is who gets to decide what crime is, because depending on what jurisdiction you're in, different things are prohibited. That, for example, in Russia is a completely different standard than if you were in the United States, and if you're in the United States today, it's a different standard than if you were in the United States 30 years ago. So who gets to determine what is valid crime anymore, especially in
Mhm.
today's funky world?
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
So our only real solution to this is to continue outrunning through development.
Um, if you don't want to change the code, yes. But yeah, potentially, if we are ready to accept a change in the code, that would take the process of block creation away from control of mining pools. That could be a solution, potential solution. Again, I'm not sure how the technical aspect will work, but if we can find a way, that would bring more uh, resistance and resiliency to Bitcoin network.
Hmm. So if you took it away from the mining pools, I mean that invalidates a business model, which maybe is a good thing because Bitcoin is about invalidating middlemen and removing them from the system as rent seekers. But at that point, you'd probably put the block template creation onto the individual miner themselves, right? Whoever actually found the block with their particular ASIC.
I will put that in the code actually.
Mm.
As long as we are relying on people to create blocks, there are ways um, for censorship. But as when that process goes is implemented in the code layer, there is no way to prevent it.
In the long
Uh,
run, is there any benefit to mining pools? I mean, we have them as a kind of a necessity if you want to reliably find a block, just because there's so much competition if you're trying to go out and find it on your own with a single machine or even hundreds of machines. Do we just have mining pools so that we can reliably find blocks, or is there another reason for them to exist far into the future?
I think most pools are already talking about auctioning their block space outside mempool for reasons and purposes such as the transaction not being standard.
Hmm.
So that that is actually picking up that like that idea. So mining pools could become more than pools, uh, which is probably unnecessary for the Bitcoin network. But they're building business models around the control and power that they have right now in the network.
Hmm. What's your personal take on the, I won't say validity because anything is valid if it's recorded on the chain, but what's your take on the extra data that comes from either the JPEGs like ordinals or runes, even the new staking protocol that was pretty recent? Like, do you think that this is a waste of block space? Do you think that this is an opportunity for miners? How do you see that?
I think anything that doesn't take the Bitcoin network down is good for Bitcoin.
Mm,
So as long as these things could be embedded into blocks and the blocks keep being created, there is no bad thing about them, and we shouldn't be the people to say what is right and what is wrong for the
mm.
network, other than the code that we already have in place. So in general, I think that's positive for Bitcoin and for Bitcoin miners.
It's tough because depending on who you are on the network, you've got a different set of incentives, right? If you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you're trying to send a transaction on the base layer, you don't really like having to pay, many multiples of what you would typically pay in transaction fees because you're trying to get in front of somebody who's memorializing their art. But obviously, we're Bitcoin miners. We make fees on those things, and they're quite often, hundreds of times more impactful in terms of the income that we make on any given block than a pure transaction fee. So you like that there's an ability to do this extra stuff so long as it doesn't break the underlying network.
Yeah, and I think there is an undesirable thing about this word, that this word is unfair, and that's part of it. So you should not seek justice in Bitcoin. We can't do that. It should be competitive, and it will last only if it is competitive enough. So if we are looking for a system that gives priority to people who have like certain needs, in that case this is not a competitive network anymore.
Do you think that moving money is the best use case for the network, or is there some truth to the importance of being able to transfer this I'm going to say arbitrary data, but these other types of data that get memorialized on the network? Do you think that can be more important?
I think the financial aspect is the most important, because the guys who are using this for other reasons, they will probably find a better way to accomplish what they're looking for
Mm.
eventually.
So even if
uh,
there's this other stuff on top of it, money is still the most important use case.
I think so. I'm personally, I'm a Bitcoiner, but I'm against decentralization. Like, we don't need decentralization in anything. Money was important, and we did it, and we're doing it. But let's say, I personally don't like the idea of decentralizing everything. I think many of these centralized models are actually working very well, and they should remain centralized.
So what do you think should remain centralized? Just the validation of the network, or kind of expand on that a little bit because I've never even heard that take before.
No, I'm talking about like other use cases or other industries. For example, the idea of having a decentralized computing network, a
Mm.
decentralized storage network, decentralized anything. So I think for many of those use cases, centralized models are actually a lot better. For money, it was very important to have a decentralized system, and Bitcoin is that decentralized money. Uh, so I think the other use cases will probably find a better way. But again, this is not a like we should not see this as black and white. This is
Hmm.
quite fuzzy. Uh, so in general, I think for other stuff other than money, there is a better opportunity in centralized systems.
I would tend to agree with you, and especially as someone who's been in the space for years, almost nothing makes me more agitated than decentralization for decentralization's sake. Like when a company or a protocol or some other layer two is their main selling point is that it's decentralized. I mean, I think the first question you have to ask is why, and why does it even matter that it's decentralized? Like you're saying, there's plenty of good systems out there that run on a centralized server, and it's a hell of a lot more efficient. And if it's not, like you said, something as societally important as our monetary base, there's not typically much of a reason that you need to have like decentralized file storage or anything like that. It doesn't necessarily confer any benefit depending on what you're in. And I'm kind of with you. I don't actually know what else is important to decentralize other than maybe communication protocols, as we've seen recently. That is kind of important to make sure that there's not a central vector of attack. But it's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of kind of hypey marketing.
I guess this is it, man. We can go forever.
We could. We could. Well, Mehdi, this has been a fantastic conversation. I agree with you. It's time someone talked about the Pacific Northwest. Everybody wants to talk about Texas. So I appreciate you giving your time to me, giving your time to our audience, and sharing all the value, man. It's such a dense topic, learning about energy, and so few are willing to do their homework. So I appreciate you distilling years of wisdom and study just so that people can listen in about an hour and get a huge download of how all this works and really up level their skills in a world of tomorrow that we're all a part of building. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Until next time.